Joe Biden and Kamala Harris will be sworn in to begin their administration. Both began their careers in national politics in the United States Senate before being elected to the White House. For Mr. Biden, the presidency has long been an aspiration, decades in the making. He will return to the West Wing after leaving on Inauguration Day 4 years ago. Joining us now is former Pennsylvania governor and former chair of the Democratic National Committee, Governor Ed Rendell. Governor, good to see you again. You've known the president-elect Joe Biden for many, many years. It's been more than 12,000 days, we've counted, since Joe Biden launched his first of 3 presidential bids in 1987. As a senior in high school, what does this day mean to him?
Well, I think it's a culmination of a dream that he had and probably at some point discarded, and that was to be president of the United States. But he showed great resolve getting there, great stick-to-itiveness. He's a guy who is very difficult to discourage. And the great thing about Joe Biden is he is who he is. I heard a fellow on TV early this morning say that he had to play regular Joe Biden, regular citizen, for these 2 months of transition. No, Joe Biden doesn't play anything. He is a regular guy. He is a regular citizen. You will find no one in the history of the presidency who will take the presidency with less arrogance, less pomp and circumstance than Joe Biden. And if you took the 2 events from last night, his farewell to his friends in Wilmington and the lighting of the lantern by the reflecting pool, they showed the humanity of Joe Biden. And the contrast is just extraordinary.
Governor Rendell, CBS News has done a bunch of polling asking people about what they think should be the top priority for this new administration. And at least right now, and they might have answered differently just a few weeks ago, but right now it has to do with unifying this country. That is precisely the theme of the inauguration address. But we saw earlier President Trump has already left the Capitol. He is the first president in more than 150 years not to attend his successor's inauguration. And though he said that he felt that the new administration would be successful, he still has yet to even say Joe Biden's name. What impact do you think this is going to have on the incoming president's attempt to bring Trump supporters on board?
Well, obviously, it's going to make it much harder. But having said that, if there's anybody who has the capacity to bring this country together, to bring the Republicans and Democrats in Washington together, it's Joe Biden. I mean, he's done it all his career. He did it for President Obama. He found key votes to get the Republican votes to get the stimulus enacted into law. It's not surprising that Joe Biden's talking about unity, and he's going to give a great speech. He gave a great speech on election night when he claimed the victory 3 or 4 days later. But speeches are fine, and Joe will make, I believe, a very moving speech. But then actions are important, and that's why it's so important, in my mind, for him to act and do some things that touch virtually all Americans in every state. And I think he can do that.
Governor, the president-elect was born in Pennsylvania. He often talks about Scranton. I know he delivered a very heartfelt and emotional speech yesterday in Wilmington, Delaware, but he is Pennsylvania-born and bred, and he was there until he was, about 10 years old or so. I'm curious, as a Pennsylvania man yourself, what about, Joe, you mentioned Joe Biden's a regular guy, regular good old Joe, is how often he was referred to, even when he was vice president under Barack Obama. I wonder about what is within his upbringing that sort of instilled in him this identity that he has, that he's seen so familiarly by so many Americans.
Well, I think we're all the product of our life experiences. And I think Joe talks about his father getting laid off. And that was really the reason that they moved to Delaware. And I think that had a profound effect on him. He understands what it's like for people to suffer, for people not to know if they're going to be able to put food on the table for their family. So I think the suffering, the tragedy he's had in his life, that's well documented, the fact that he still has tremendous memories and fondness of his son, Bo. The ceremony at Wilmington ended with an old rock and roll song called "You Only Get What You Want," played by the New Radicals. Now, why did they play that song at the end? Because his daughter Ashley, in her speech at Bo's funeral, said that was the song that they, two of them, listened to cheer them up about the fate of the nation and what could happen to our country. So he's a product of all those tragedies. He's a product of having to go from a family whose breadwinner lost his job. So he's a product of all of that. And he's a caring individual. You can't fake caring. There are some emotions that politicians can fake if they're good actors, but it's very hard to fake empathy. Joe Biden's empathy is real, it's incredible, and it's one of the things that I think will give him a chance to bind the country together. Ironically, I think his chance to unify the country benefited by what happened at the Capitol on January 6th. Because Republicans, as well as Democrats, they know how that affected the country. They know the country doesn't want us to screw around and have the same old polarization. They want to get things done. So I've advocated, I wrote a column for The Hill, that we do a robust COVID relief package. That's number one. And I think we'll see that, and it'll advance the stipend to Americans to $2,000. It'll have money for vaccine implementation. It'll have money to the states to help them with their problems. It'll have money for small businesses. That'll be number one. Number two, I would do a $15 minimum wage. Americans and polls are all for it. Florida passed a referendum for a $15 minimum wage. 61% yes vote, even though Donald Trump carried the state by 5 points. So I do a $15 minimum wage. Who's going to vote against that? Essential workers need to be paid like they're essential. So I think he can do that. I do a bill lowering prescription drug prices. There's almost unanimity on that a bill needs to happen. And then I do a robust infrastructure bill, because infrastructure would have a dramatic effect on our economy. And
Governor, let me just point out to our viewers that we're seeing the motorcade. This is the motorcade in which the president-elect is traveling in along with the vice president-elect. So it's literally just about to pull up to the Capitol. And so we'll be watching for that when it happens. One last question, Governor, about before we talk about some of the policies that you're hoping to see from a Biden administration. You know, I thought what was especially moving, the president-elect often talks about Dr. Biden as his rock. But it was interesting, and I've said this earlier, that the president-elect is very familiar with the language of loss. You mentioned when only at the age of 29, he pulled off that surprising upset over a Republican incumbent to win that race for the United States Senate. Just before he was sworn in, though, his wife, his 13-month-old daughter were killed, and his 2 young sons were hospitalized in that horrific car accident. And when he met Jill Jacobs in 1977, he said something yesterday that just struck me in the heart, where he said she has been able to rebuild a broken man. Just talk to us a little bit about the influence Dr. Biden has had on his life and on the upbringing of his 2 sons and daughter.
Well, she's had an amazing impact, and Joe's description is probably the best way to say it. Joe carried on in light of the loss of his wife and his daughter. He became Amtrak Joe because he took the train home every night to be with his boys when they were younger. He was a great parent, but he didn't have the same zest for life. He didn't have the same enthusiasm that characterizes Joe Biden that the public knows. It wasn't until he met Jill and they fell in love and they got married that he got that sense of optimism back, that zest for life back. We take pride because Jill Biden is really a Philly girl. And she brought him back to the Joe Biden that we've all come to love, someone who's upbeat, someone who believes, as he says in all his speeches, that there's nothing America can't do when we put our mind to it. She really gave him a sense of rebirth. And we're all very grateful to Jill for doing that, and also grateful for the work she does, being an advocate for education, being a community college teacher. She's been extraordinary.
We're just watching now.
And we're watching Joe Biden and Jill and Kamala Harris and her husband. They're entering the Capitol building right now. I wanted to ask you another question, kind of similar actually to what Vlad brought up, but springboarding off of you talking about his upbringing and the challenging experiences that he went through, and not only how it shaped his character, but how it brought him to this point. As Vlad pointed out, this is the third time that he has run to be the president, but many have said that this is his time and his moment, because he's meeting the country where it is. He understands loss at a time when millions are grieving over losing 400,000 Americans to COVID-19. He understands what happens to a family when the breadwinner can no longer make a living, and when many are sort of buckling under the financial strain associated with this pandemic. Is this, in your opinion, is this his time? It's not the time perhaps that he might have wanted. He might have wanted this earlier, but is this the best time for Joe Biden to be president?
It is, and it's the best time for the U.S. to have Joe Biden as president. I heard a minister say right before the election that what America needs now is goodness. We need more goodness in our public discourse. And America found a very, very good man, probably the best man to run and become president at this time in our nation's history. Not necessarily the best speaker or the most dynamic leader, although Joe's fine in those categories, but certainly the person who has the most humanity, has the most empathy, has the most understanding of what it is for people to suffer, for people to have lost. So we're getting the right man at the right time, and I think all Americans should wish him well.
And we're seeing those pictures right now, Governor, of the president-elect, Dr. Joe Biden, the Vice President-elect Kamala Harris, and her husband Doug Emhoff, along with some other members of Congress. We saw Senator Amy Klobuchar, Senator Roy Blunt, all there walking into the United States Capitol, where in just a few moments, Joe Biden will be sworn in as the 46th President of the United States. Let's see if we can listen in and catch some words. So, Governor, we just saw the president-elect and the vice president-elect on their way to the swearing-in ceremony, and here is House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. We caught an earlier glimpse of former President Barack Obama. We caught a glimpse of former President Bill Clinton. We know that George W. Bush and Mrs. Bush will be in attendance, as well as Vice President Mike Pence and his wife. The only person missing will be President Trump. The Carters wanted to be there, as they have attended every single inauguration since 1977, Governor, as you know, but because of health reasons and because of the pandemic, they're unable to be there. And as I watch these scenes, Governor, I just think to myself, in a way, when we talk about turning the page on an administration, by President Trump not being there, he's almost erased himself from this history that we're witnessing, this peaceful transition of power, by not attending.
Yeah, I think by his failing to recognize that he lost the election or admit it publicly, by the way he shunned Joe Biden, it's just as good that he's not at the inaugural ceremonies. Because, as you said, then he sort of fades out of the picture and allows Joe Biden to occupy space. I will say this about Vice President Pence, who I've never agreed with much on policy, but Vice President Pence has proved himself to be a stand-up American by what he did on the night of January 6th and by breaking with the president and attending the inauguration. I say kudos to Mike Pence for doing the right thing, both the night of the 6th and today during the inauguration.
Former Governor Ed Rendell, thank you so much, Governor, for spending a few moments with us as we take in this historical moment, the swearing in of the next president of the United States, Joe Biden. Thank you, sir.
Have a great day, guys.
Thank you.